qualitative analysis. We'll be covering mainly chromatographic functions today, different things that you can do and operate on in chromatograms in the qualitative analysis. Okay, we'll be covering MassHunter version 7.0 and earlier in this particular webinar. The MassHunter qualitative analysis version B.08 is going to be covered in future webinars. Okay, many of the features illustrated in today's webinar are applicable to other versions and later versions of the MassHunter qualitative analysis software. Okay, first thing we need to do here is define qualitative analysis. What is qualitative analysis? Well, it is when we have samples and we really don't know what's in there. We want to identify those. We want to extract mass spectrum from our chromatogram and do a library search on those, identify those. If we're dealing with high-resolution data, accurate mass data, then what we want to do is possibly generate molecular formulas for the compounds that we have if we're in a discovery-type mode there. So qualitative analysis is where we're looking to find the compounds, what's in a given mixture, identify those. Then the next step, most typically, is to set up some sort of quantitation. The quantitation software was covered in previous lectures. What we're going to be covering today is the user interface, some user workflows that are available to us to facilitate the work that we're doing, depending upon exactly what type of work we're doing. We have various workflows that have been generated that allow us to step through the various steps necessary. Then we also have the different views, the navigator, compound details view. We're going to discuss and illustrate those. We also have some methods. We're going to define what methods are, explain the unified method concept. And then in qualitative analysis, we're going to look at the method explorer, the method editor, and then also some things that we can do working with our chromatograms, anchoring, scaling, chromatogram functions that we have, the integrators, and then we have some concluding remarks from Agilent University that we'll be presenting at the end. Okay, first of all, MassHunter qualitative analysis is a configurable software. It's one program that we have for many different types of instruments that Agilent sells. For example, we have single quad data, which is available from an LC and/or GC. And typically, this is unit mass resolution. It's most typically, again, scan data, but it could also be SIM data as well. SIM data is selected ion monitoring, where we kind of have an idea of what we're looking for. We've chosen a bunch of masses or ions, and we just scan on those, or we just look at those ions instead of scanning the entire mass range. Then we have also our triple quad data, which is available, again, it's unit mass, and it comes in scan, SIM, and MRM mode, multi-reaction monitoring, which is MSMS type data. Then we also have our TOF systems for LC, which is high-resolution data, and this is most typically scan data that we're looking at there. In addition to that, we have our QTOF, which is available for LC and GC front ends, and this is high-resolution data again, and it's MSMS type data. So the MassHunter qualitative software can handle all of these data types. But as you can probably see here, if everything was exposed at once, the software would be very confusing. So what we have is the ability to configure the MassHunter qualitative analysis to reduce the complexity of the software and to hide unneeded and potentially misused features. Okay, even when it's properly configured, some features and parameters for MSMS and accurate mass data are still available, but basically just ignore those and avoid those for day-to-day operations. And you'll be able to distinguish those pretty easily in the software. So one of the first steps that we want to do when we start up the MassHunter qualitative analysis software is we want to go to the configuration menu item, the user interface, and we want to set it up for the type of data that we're running. In this example, we're running GC data, unit mass for either a single quad or a triple quad. We're going to look at electron impact and soft ionization techniques for chemical ionization. And since we're just looking at unit mass data, I'm configured in this particular example just for MS spectra. And if I had a UV detector, then I would select the UV. If I had an analog to digital converter for some sort of detector, I could do that. In addition to that, we also have additional software features that can be configured. We have the peptide sequence editor for those working with peptides, and then we also have the bioconfirm software that can be installed on the system. Then another feature that we have is show advanced parameters. When I'm configuring an instrument, I generally recommend showing the advanced parameters. There are a few method editor items, and we'll come in and define method editor and method explorer a little later. But basically, show those advanced parameters. They help us refine the data, the extracted ions that we're looking at, and so forth. So they're very useful. I always recommend turning those on as well. Okay, in addition to the configuration of the software, we also have various workflows that are available to us. And it depends, the workflows that are available depends upon the software that's loaded and also what you're going to be doing. We have a general workflow, and in this particular example, the bioconfirm software has been loaded, and we have various features that are applicable to the bioconfirm. Are we working with intact proteins, or are we working with oligonucleotides? We can configure and set up a workflow for that, and the workflow just involves the various steps. Then we also have chromatographic peak survey, formula confirmation, sample purity, and MS target screening. And it really depends upon what software is loaded and then the configuration that we've selected there. So for example, I come over to the configuration menu item again, configure for workflow, and then I have my various workflows in here. As we change workflows, what happens is you get a workflow configuration pop-up window, and generally speaking, my recommendations here are to load the workflow's default method, which has some parameters adjusted for this workflow, and it may include also some other report templates and so forth applicable to this workflow. And then I always recommend loading the workflow's default layout as well. This is way, for beginners at least, we have the ability, you're set up in kind of a universal or a common layout for that. Okay, and here are just some examples. Here's the chromatographic peak workflow. When we're set up in the general, the default workflow, okay, we see the chromatogram, spectrum, general, and the rest of the items in the Method Explorer. When I set up the workflow for the chromatographic peak survey, some specific workflow items are added. What should I do with the previous results? Chromatogram extraction, integrations, mass spectrum extraction. All these features would be used when I'm surveying a given chromatogram and trying to identify the unknown peaks in there. Okay, and then I also have my MS target compound screening workflow. Okay, again, comparing that with the general workflow, the target screening allows us to look at extraction. How do I want to extract that data? Do I want to extract it as profile data? Do I want to extract it as centroided data? How I want to work with my chromatograms? What do I want to do with my mass spectra? Then I have several of these find-by algorithms that would be available to me. Find-by algorithms would go out and look at the data and find molecular features that match up and give you a mass spectrum related to that for subsequent library searching or database searching. It can also generate formulas with high-resolution type data, the match scoring compound reports, and then I can also set up some automation with this as well. Okay. Having shown those, here's the first view that's available to us. It's the navigator view. This is the default view that we have available. Generally speaking, in the navigator view, the data navigator is in the upper left corner. The Data Navigator shows us the various data files that we have open and what features we have extracted out of those. TICs, extracted ion chromatograms, user spectra here, user spectra that I pulled out for this particular data file. Then I also have the Method Explorer. Method Explorer by default is located in the lower left-hand corner, and this is where all the parameters and algorithms that are available to me in this specific configuration that I am and in the specific workflow that I'm using that are available to me. Then I also have the next item is the Method Editor. The Method Editor gives me more specific parameters or things that I can change or look for an item in the Method Explorer, pardon me. So when I click on something in the Method Explorer, the Method Editor window will pop up, and it will allow me to make selections based on the type of data and what I'm looking for there. Then I also have what's called the chromatogram results window. This is where the TIC typically would be displayed, but I can also display other type chromatograms in here, extracted ion chromatograms, base peak chromatograms, and so forth. And then the last window in this Navigator view, default view, is the spectrum results. This is where I would set up and look at the mass spectrum as I was going from peak to peak in this particular chromatogram. Extracting out the mass spectrum, I could then do library searches on it or save those as part of the data file. There's lots of things to do with those after. Well, just a little brief thing about the Data Navigator. Okay, Data Navigator in the upper left-hand corner can be sorted by two ways. We could sort it by data file, or we can sort it by type. Well, let's go back to data file here a second. One of the powers of MassHunter Qualitative Analysis is that I can have many data files open at one time, and I can be doing comparative work on those, and I can also be doing automated work on one or a number of those. If I sort the Data Navigator by data file, I have the data file as the main category, and then the various items. You'll notice the plus sign here for user chromatograms. If I expand that out, I would see what user chromatograms I had. In this example, we've expanded it out for this data file. I have a TIC MS type, positive mode of everything. I also have extracted one user spectra from this, a product ion spectrum. If I sort by type, same example here, I have many data files open, and I want to compare TICs. Rather than going through a long list in the sort by data file names, what I could do is sort it by type, and I'll have all my user chromatograms and what mass spectrum or which data file they came out of, as well as my user spectra and which data file they came out of. So this is an often underutilized feature. In the Data Navigator, we can sort by data file, and we can also sort by type. Then I also have another view that's available to me called the Compound Details view. Compound Details view is activated from the toolbar in Qualitative Analysis, and this gives me a little bit different here. I get what's called a compound list of all the compounds that one of my find by algorithms has generated. In the lower left-hand corner, I now have my chromatogram results, compound chromatogram results. What did the compound look like as it was extracted or found by one of the algorithms in MassHunter Qualitative Analysis? Then I also have my compound MS spectrum results. This is the mass spectrum. And if I had MS type data, in the compound fragment spectrum results window, I would see the MS type data there. Well, first of all, I guess what we need to do now is define what is a user spectra and what is a compound. Okay, a user spectra are mass spectra that you generate. You double-click on a location or a peak in the chromatogram results window, and you generate it. Compounds are generated by one of the find by algorithms. The compounds are generated by the software. Okay, so that's the big difference. User spectra are things that you pull out, you generate the mass spectrum for that, and compounds and their associated mass spectrum are generated by one of the find-by algorithms. Well, it's no problem. As you can see here, I have some user spectra that I generated. I also have a compound, the TIC scan associated with that, and then the mass spectrum for that particular compound as well. Well, if I wanted to look at the compounds, it's very easy, straightforward. Just a right-click on the mass spectrum. I can copy it to a user spectra, copy the compound to a user spectra, or I can create a compound for each of the user spectra that I found. Very interchangeable. The importance of this is when we start doing library searching. Do I want to search my user spectra? Do I want to search my compounds? Okay, having covered that information, let's move on now to exposing and hiding windows. Okay, in MassHunter, you're going to see there are a lot of windows, and it can get overwhelming. Well, there are two ways to look at the various windows that I want. I can come to my View menu item, and I can toggle those on and off there. In addition to that, I also have my toolbar. And if this was a live system and not a slide, what you would see here is as I hovered my mouse over each of these, I would get a note telling me what these particular icons did. So when your windows start getting very complicated, you can turn those on and off depending upon exactly what you're doing. We can also take these windows, and if you don't like the default layouts, what we could do here is move those around. So I could click on the title bar of any given window. What happens then is as I move it around, I get this pop-up here, and I can bring it around. In a few minutes, we're going to have Howard demo this. Demos much better than it does on a slide here. But we have the ability to dock and undock these windows as needed. We have the ability to turn them on and turn them off as needed. Well, when you're moving these windows all around and you have many of them turned on, the display, the user interface can get overwhelming. When that happens, we have an escape for getting back to it. If we come up to our configuration menu item, Windows Layouts, we can restore the default layout. This will bring us right back to what the Navigator view is by default. And this is very useful, especially when you're running into trouble with too many windows. In multi-user systems, I may prefer one type of window. Howard or Matt may wind up preferring a different type of window layout for their qualitative work. Well, I can load and save the various layouts, and as each of us come onto the instrument or start using qualitative analysis, we can load and save our own layouts for how we're doing our work. In addition to that, if you start getting a bunch of error messages out of qualitative analysis, or if the configuration is suspect, if something's wrong with that, we have another way to do it. What's recommended here is we come in, try to close qualitative analysis, all sessions of qualitative analysis. And if we come to our Windows Start button, Agilent, MassHunter Workstation, and if we go into Qualitative Analysis B07 Tools, we can restore the qual settings. This restores a configuration file that controls qualitative analysis to default values. In addition to using your Windows Start button, there's also a folder that appears on the desktop when MassHunter Qualitative Analysis is installed. If you open up that folder, you'll also see Restore Qual Settings in there. This is used to bring us back to the original settings. Very useful feature if things get really messed up in there. Okay, remember we said compounds are generated by the system. Okay, it's generated by one of the find-by algorithms. Well, how those compounds are displayed in the Data Navigator, I have control over the information that I want to use or set up. So if I come over to my configuration menu item, compound label configuration, what I could do here is come over compound label configuration, and I can select those items that I want to see and the order that I want to see those in. what I recommend doing here is include all selected attributes that have values. Doing the first one just shows us rather limited. So when I come into my data navigator and I'm looking at the compounds, I now have more information available about those. For example, what we'll see happening here is I have compounds. These are all the compounds that one of my find by algorithms generated. I have a number, an indexing number for those. I like to see that. I have a retention time, a molecular weight, a formula after a formula search on that. And then I also have the compound name here as well. So this is very useful information that I would find when I'm starting working with compounds. And again, compounds are things that one of the find by algorithms locates or generates for us. All right, one of the first steps you're going to do when you come into qualitative analysis, after doing the configuration and setting up the workflow and so forth, is going to be to open a data file. Now again, the power of the MassHunter qualitative analysis is that we have the ability to open more than one data file at a time and do comparative work and do automation on various data files. So after selecting those data files, you have two items in the lower left-hand corner of the Open Data File window. Load Results Data. The Load Results Data, if it is saved, okay, will show you everything that you've done previously with this particular data file. The Run File Open Actions is a bunch of automated actions that can be run on that data file when you open it. For example, you can extract out EICs, base peak chromatograms, or whatever you want to do. Well, what happens here in this window, the Open Data File, the Run File Open Actions is checked by default. So what you're going to want to do is, when you're opening data files, pay attention to whether this is checked or not checked. Because if it is checked, and by default it's set up to run and generate a TIC, well, what happens here, every time I load a data file, I see two TICs, and this is confusing to me. Why do I see these two? Well, that's because you have the Run File Open Actions checked, and by default it extracts out a TIC. So pay attention to Load Results Data if you wanted to see the old data that was saved, or Run File Open Actions when opening data files. In the MassHunter software, under the File menu item, we also have Refresh Data File. This is a very useful feature. Say, for example, you have a 60-minute chromatographic run, but your boss needs to know an answer in 30 minutes. He can't wait 60 minutes to find out the answer if this compound's in there or whatever the case may be. Well, what I could do is, well, fortunately in this scenario, my peak comes out at 20 minutes. So what I could do here is come into MassHunter, Qualitative Analysis, go to File, say Refresh Data File, and it will load that data file up to that point in time. So I can view that peak in my example that comes out at 20 minutes, well before my 60-minute run is finished. So I can get the answer to my boss in a very timely fashion. This feature, for those of us that are GCMS ChemStation users, was called Snapshot. And this allows us to view a live data file while the data is being acquired.